The unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, we can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Yesterday we left off with the Buddha tying 6 knots in a scarf to show how to untie the knots that we have created in our own mind and body. Well, Ananda, the Buddha asked Ananda, I now ask you, can we untie the 6 knots in this cotton scarf all at the same time? No, World-Honored One, Ananda says, these knots are tied in sequence in the first place, so now they must be untied in sequence. Although the 6 knots are all in the same scarf, they were not all tied at the same time. Therefore, in freeing them, we cannot untie all of them at the same time. The Buddha said, the same may be said of freeing the knots of the 6 faculties. In the first stage of freeing a faculty, one understands that the self is empty. Once that emptiness is fully understood, one can become free of attachments to phenomena. Once one is free of attachments to phenomena, then both self and phenomenon have been emptied and will no longer arise. This is the patience that the Bodhisattva develops by means of samadhi. The patience with a state in which no mental objects come into being. At that point, the Ananda asked the Buddha, what's the best one for me? And the people of the Dharma and the age. And the Buddha sees that Ananda is really just hoping that he would somehow zap him with a sequence and transmission, so he wouldn't have to do the work of training his mind. So what the Buddha does is he has 25 sages, all describing how they got their enlightenment and what senses or what objects they used in the process. I'm not sure I can go through in the time we have to discuss all of these, but I'll give it a go and see how far we get here. The first one is Ajnata Kundinya, who is one of the 5 ascetics in the deer park, who had trained with the Buddha before his enlightenment, and had left him when they thought he had become soft and accepted food, and discovered that the practice of the middle way of not indulging in asceticism, not indulging in pleasures, but finding a way to treat the body and mind with kindness and with moderation. And so Kundinya here is describing that how he got his enlightenment was hearing the 4 Noble Truths, also seeing the image of the host and the guest at a guest house, and the dust in the air shown in the sunlight. So Kundinya is talking about the sound of hearing the Dharma. And this is how he got his enlightenment. Upanishad developed an aversion to visible objects. Whitened bones turned to dust, dispersed into space and vanish. He understood their fundamental emptiness. The third was virgin youth named sublimity of fragrance. He got his understanding through the smelling of incense. He saw that it came from nowhere and disappeared into emptiness. As a result of this contemplation, he directed his mind to the emptiness of the smells and became enlightened. The next is Vaishashva Guru and his brother, the Master of Healing and the King of Healing. They got their enlightenment after tasting 108,000 different substances and discovering their healing property. So they got their enlightenment through flavors. Bhadrapala, plus his 16 companions, the virtuous protector. He found enlightenment in contact with water. As he got into the bath, he had a sudden experience of seeing the emptiness of the water. The water was not washing away the dirt, nor was it cleaning his body. He realized that everything was actually fundamentally empty. The water, the dirt, his body. Mahakashapa, who is the first one on our transmission line after the Buddha, he had a relationship with a woman, Bhikshuni, purple golden radiance, and they found their understanding through objects of cognition. Hearing a form of Buddha teaching how to hear, studying and practicing the Dharma, he contemplated the diminishing and perishing of the objects of cognition. So he is foremost in beneficial asceticism. And this was asceticism that the Buddha allowed him to do, but didn't require other people to do it. During the Buddha's lifetime, his cousin Devadatta wanted him to insist on more and more ascetic practices, and he wouldn't do it. But he did. If someone wanted to do ascetic practices, these are the ones that they could do, which is wearing ragged robes, possessing only 3 robes, only eating food from alms round, making an alms round for every day for their food, not drinking juices after noon, dwelling in a quiet place, dwelling beneath a tree, dwelling out in the open, and dwelling in a graveyard and never lying down to sleep. These are the ascetic practices that if one was really into asceticism, these are the ones that could do. Anuruddha was blind because the Buddha scolded him for being lazy. And he was so upset about that he strove for a week without sleep. And he ended up going blind. So the Buddha taught him a Vajra Samadhi and taking delight in the illuminative vision. So he was able to turn his vision inward and see clearly with his mind. Kasudapra Bantika was so slow in learning that he would forget the last part of the teaching, one sentence of the teaching, when he started the first part. Or when he finished the whole sentence, he couldn't remember what he said. Well, it turns out that this came from a past life where he was the master of the teaching of the Buddhist canon, the Dharma, but refused to give out teaching to others. So he was born with this total lack of being able to memorize the teaching. There's a story about him. He's the one who, the Buddha gave him a broom and told him to just clean up the monastery. And every time he was given a mantra that the source of suffering is attachment to a delusion. And after some years of cleaning the monastery and repeating this one phrase, he had a breakthrough where he saw what it was to cause his memory to be so bad as a result of not giving out the teaching in a former life. So the Buddha had him just watch his breath and do this very simple mantra. Gavampati was the next one. he committed an offense in a previous life by insulting an elder monk. As a result, in this life, he suffered illnesses which caused him to chew like a cow. The Buddha showed him how, practicing the Dharma of the mind ground, he could make all flavors become one. So he practiced using this faculty of the tongue by redirecting his awareness of flavors away from the surface back into his own mind, and he became enlightened. Number 11 is Vilanta Devasta. He heard the Buddha say that nothing in this world can bring joy. So while in an alms round, he failed to notice a poisonous thorn and stepped on it. The pain suffused his entire body. Reflecting on deep pain, and also he was aware of his awareness of the pain. He realized that in pure mind there is neither pain nor the awareness of the pain. Eventually his body and mind became suddenly empty. He realized the purity of one's tactile awareness until his body was forgotten and his path to understanding opened. Subhuti became enlightened by awareness of the cognitive faculty and the emptiness of all things. And also the emptiness of the emptiness is also empty. One understands emptiness, and the emptiness is understood is also empty. Shariputra got his understanding through the eye consciousness. With his eye consciousness he became radiant with light. And when that light reached its ultimate intensity, it illuminated the wisdom and the vision of the Buddha. Samantabhadra, universal goodness, got his enlightenment by ear consciousness. His hearing was unimpeded. Whenever any being thinks of practicing universal goodness, he goes to them and supports them, even if they can't see him. Sutra refined his breath until it shone with light, and when the light shone everywhere, his outflows ended. Purna, Maitreya Yaniputra, is endowed with great eloquence. With his lion roar of the Dharma, he was able to overcome adversities and subdue the demons, and was able to put an end to his outflow. These next two are kind of a mixture of two beings, Upali and Chana. They learned to govern their body until the body was at ease with being governed. The next, he was gradually learned to govern his mind until his thoughts, according to that which was right. Only then did his body and mind gain unobstructed understanding. The next one is Moggallana. He returned the mind consciousness to its source, so that the light of his mind shone forth and revealed the turbid flux of mind consciousness within it. That flux gradually subsided until it became brilliantly clear. Uchisma, Firehead, had been afflicted with an excess of sexual desire. A former Buddha said that a blazing fire grows within those with too much sexual desire. He was taught to transform excessive sexual desire into the fire of wisdom. He carefully observed all the places of warmth in his body until they became unobstructed. And there they could be a free movement through them. A magnificent light blazed forth in his mind and lit the way to supreme enlightenment. The Bodhisattva ground leveler had done a practice of fixing the roads, carrying people and goods for others on the roads, building bridges, leveling the ground. Once a former Buddha was coming to the city in which he lived, and so he leveled the roads for him And when he came into the city, he put his hand over Ground Leveler's head and said, "You should level the ground of your mind. Then the ground throughout the whole world will become level as well." Immediately his mind opened, and he saw that in part of his body was composed of the earth element. And he saw that the particles, all the particles, could never actually come in contact with another. This way he realized the emptiness of the physical forms, and he learned to be patient with no mental objects arising. He then resolved to become a bodhisattva. He realized that all the particles in his body were the same as all the elements of the earth. Fundamentally, they were all the matrix of the thus come one. And all the particles are themselves illusions. And when they disappeared, his understanding was complete. Number 20 here is pure youth moonlight, who recalled a former Buddha named Water and Sky, who taught the contemplation of insight into the primary element of water. He saw that all the fluids of his body were the same as the water outside the body. In deep meditation, he was able to turn his body into just a puddle of water. And in doing this one day, a young disciple who was not too bright opened the door and saw this puddle of water and thought it was very weird. And he threw in a piece of pottery into the water. And when the monk came out of the samadhi and returned to having body, he had a major pain in his heart and he couldn't figure out where that came from. At that point, the young man came up and explained what he had done. And so the monk told him that next time he saw that puddle of water, to carefully go in there and take out that piece of pottery. And so when he did that, the pure youth moonlight was able to reconstitute into a person, and he didn't have any more pain in his heart. But his form of enlightenment was to understand the nature of water and our relationship to that. The Dharma Prince, brilliance of lapis lazuli, trained under a former Buddha. Infinite voice. The world and beings' bodies are unreal phenomena that are made to move by the power of wind. All the movements in the world are fundamentally the same. He came to understand that all movements come from nowhere and go to nowhere. Countless beings throughout the 10 directions are all equally unreal. After meeting the Buddha, he was able to be patient when no mental objects arose. His mind opened, and in the east he saw the land of the unmoving Buddha. His means of enlightenment was to contemplate that the element of wind has no essential attributes of its own. The Bodhisattva matrix of space contemplated the identity of mind, body, and all the Buddha lands. All are pervaded with space. First, all the lands are seen as identical with space. Then the identity of mind and space. He sees his body as identical with space. Since contemplating the identity of all the primary elements, he saw that they have no essential elements of their own. They come into being and cease to be as a result of diluted mental acts. He contemplated the boundlessness of space and entered samadhi. Maitreya became a monk under the Buddha brilliance of sun and moon and lamp. He yearned for fame and cultivated friendships with eminent families and nobility of the time. The Buddha taught him to contemplate that all beings exist only in consciousness. His yearning for fame vanished, and he realized that everything comes from consciousness only. Mahasamaprapta is the Buddha that we see in the pictures of Amitabha with Avalokiteshvara on one side and Mahasamaprapta on the other side. Now Mahasamaprapta is the Dharma prince of great strength. During the life of a former Buddha, infinite light, he learned from the Buddha the name of the Buddha is light surpassing the sun and the moon. He learned from this Buddha to practice the samadhi of mindfulness of the Buddha. And what he's learned is about connecting his mind with that of the Buddha. And he uses the example of people who have a natural affinity, a child and its parents. The mother may think always about her child, but only if the child thinks about the parent will there be a connection through many lifetimes. So people who always think of the Buddha will have a connection with the Buddha because the Buddhas are always thinking of people. And they will form that connection. So that's why in the school, the Pure Land school, they recite the name of Amitabha, creating this connection between themselves and the Buddha. This is a practice that's actually one of the most widely used practices in Buddhism, probably more so than meditation. The last one is Avalokiteshvara. The former Buddha of the same name taught him to enter samadhi through hearing and contemplation. He began with the practice based on the enlightened nature of hearing. First, he redirected his hearing inward. Then external sounds disappeared. Then both sound and silence ceased. Gradually he progressed. What he heard and the awareness of what he heard came to an end. Then everything ended. He did not rest. Awareness and objects of awareness were empty. Then the emptiness ceased. Even that had to be empty. Coming into being and ceasing themselves ceased. Then the ultimate stillness was revealed. He just kept going inward in his hearing. And basically, this is what we're doing in our meditation. One of the things that helps me a lot is to simply listen instead of getting involved in thoughts. If you turn your attention to listening, then you're no longer involved in the thinking process. Now, it can go on all by itself, but if you give your attention to thinking, and some people when they do this have an experience of what's called listening to silence. Ajahn Sumedho wrote a nice book about this some years ago. And he learned it from a man in France who was doing this practice. And it's something that I personally do, just listening to silence. It's there all the time. It's whether you put your attention on it or not is the choice that you make. The choice that I make in meditation, just learning to listen rather than putting energy into either trying to deal with the thoughts or trying to get rid of the thoughts. It's just turning inward and listening. And he carries this quite deeply into emptying even the emptiness that came up. And he just kept sitting still, going back to being still, listening. When all that disappeared, he just kept working on being still with that. And all of a sudden, he transcended the worlds of ordinary beings and also transcended the world of beings who have transcended the ordinary worlds. Everything in the 10 directions was fully illuminated, and I gained 2 remarkable powers. First, my mind ascended to unite with the fundamental wondrous enlightenment mind of the Buddha in all 10 directions, and my power of compassion became the same as theirs. Second, my mind ascended to unite with all beings in the 6 destinies, in all 10 directions, such that I felt their sorrows and their prayerful yearning as my own. World-honored one, because I had made offerings to the thus come one, to the Buddha, who hears the cries of the world, I received from this Buddha a hidden transmission of a Vajra-like samadhi, such that my power of compassion became the same as the Buddha's. I was then able to go to all lands and appear in 32 forms that responded to what beings required. And so he actually represents the infinite compassion of all the Buddhas in all directions. And anybody who calls upon him will immediately have access to this infinite compassion. And it describes the 32 different ways in which he can appear, which actually just means in any particular form. If sages need help, he will appear as a sage. If Buddhas need help, he will appear as a Buddha. If there are sages who still need instruction, but who have broken free of the links of chain of dependent arising, and they need help, he will go to them. If there are sages who still need instruction, but whose minds dwell in emptiness, in accordance with the teaching of the Four Noble Truths as they practice the path that leads to nirvana, and they wish to attain a more sublime understanding, he will appear to them and teach them. If there are beings who clearly understand the desires of the mind and do not engage in the activities of desire, and they wish to have pure bodies, I will appear to them as Brahma, king, and I will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to liberation. To beings who desire to be celestial lords and govern the heavens, I will appear as Lord Chakra. To beings who wish for a body that has the freedom of ease to roam throughout the 10 directions, I will appear to them as the Lord of the heavens of delight in creating, and instruct them. To beings who wish for a body that has the freedom and ease to fly through space, I will appear as the Lord of the heavens of pleasure, derived from what others create, and I will instruct these gods in the Dharma that will lead them to the fulfillment of their wishes. To beings who would like to govern ghosts and spirits in order to protect their countries, I will appear as a great celestial general. To beings who would like to rule the world in order to protect its inhabitants, I will appear as one of the 4 celestial kings. To beings who would like to be born into a celestial palace and to command ghosts and spirits, I will appear as a prince of one of the 4 celestial kings and instruct them in the Dharma that will lead to the fulfillment of their wish. To beings who would like to be kings among people, I will appear as a human king, and I will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to the fulfillment of their wish. To beings who would like to be heads of clans and would like to command everyone's respect and deference, I will appear as an elder and will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to the fulfillment of their wish. To beings who would like to be able to discuss celebrated writings and to live a pure life, I will appear as a layperson and will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to the fulfillment of their wish. To beings who would like to govern a country or decide the affairs of province or of a province or a district, I will appear to them as a minister of state and will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to the fulfillment of their wish. To beings who would like to employ numerology and other esoteric disciplines out of the wish to protect and nurture them, I will appear as a Brahmin, and I will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to the fulfillment of their wish. To men who would like to learn about becoming a monk and about observing the monastic precepts and regulations, I will appear as a monk, and will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to the fulfillment of their wish. To women who would like to learn about becoming a nun, or a bhikkhuni, or a female monk, I will appear to to that person and will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to the fulfillment of their wish. To men who would like to observe the 5 precepts of the laity, I will appear as another layman and instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to the fulfillment of their wish. To women who would like to ground themselves in the 5 precepts of the laity, I will appear as a precepted laywoman and instruct them in the Dharma. To virtuous women of high standing who would like to manage the affairs of a household or of a country, I will appear as a queen, or as the wife of a lord, or else as some other noblewoman, and will instruct them on how to realize their wish. To young men who wish to remain celibate, I will appear as a pure youth, and will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to fulfillment of their wish. To young women who wish to remain celibate, never to be violated, I will appear as a pure young woman, and I will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to fulfill their wish. To celestial beings who no longer wish to be celestial beings, I will appear in a celestial form, and will instruct them in the Dharma that will allow them to fulfill their wish. To dragons who no longer wish to be dragons, I will appear as a dragon, and will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to fulfill their wish. To yakshas the same, to gandharvas the same, to asuras, to kimnaras, to maharagas, to beings who enjoy being human and who wish to continue as humans, I will appear as a human form and will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to the fulfillment of their wish. To non-human beings who wish to be free from being non-human, whether they have bodies or bodiless, whether they are capable of cognition or not capable of cognition, I will appear to them as they are and will instruct them in the Dharma that will lead them to fulfillment of their wish. In these 32 pure and wondrous forms in which I appear in all lands in order to respond to what beings require, I accomplish this samadhi, which I enter by redirecting my faculty of hearing towards inwards to merge with the enlightened nature of hearing, until with wondrous power of my self-mastery it becomes effortless. So, I won't read the whole of this chapter, but the Buddha then asked Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, which of these 25 ways of getting to deep understanding, to opening a heart to enlightenment is the best for Ananda and the people of the Dharma ending age? And Manjushri has a long poem here, which I don't think I have the time to read. And we'll see if I can take a little bit of a look at it here. So Manjushri goes through all of the different ways of coming to enlightenment. And he comes to the conclusion, based on what Avalokiteshvara said, and he says that it's the same practice that he, Samantabhadra, and Avalokiteshvara all used, which was the sitting with silence and going inward into the hearing. At the end of his poem, the bhikkhuni, whose name was Nature, became an arhat, and she was the Matega woman who had tried to seduce Ananda, which started this whole scripture, had become a bhikkhuni at the time Ananda had returned to the monastery, and had now at this point become an arhat. So the next chapter of the sutra, which I'm not going to go into, is the mantra which we discussed at first. And in this translation, they don't translate the mantra because they want to say it in the Chinese transliteration of the Sanskrit. A lot of the Chinese traditions do this as part of their morning service. And it also has very specific instructions in setting up a hall to do the Surangama ceremony. And the next chapter is on 4 clear and definitive instructions on purity, which is the first 4 precepts that we take. And the scripture was written in Chinese in a 4-part stanza. So the 4 doesn't mean here that those are the only 4. It just means they discuss these 4 because they're the most important. And killing, stealing, sexual desire, and misuse of language are the 4 that are discussed. And I'm not going to go into them because of a time consideration here. So these are the 4 precepts that are most important, and they are discussed in great detail. But I'm not going to go into the details of that because most of the time we've done that before we take the precepts. And there are several other chapters here. One of them is levels of beings, and there's a major discussion about beings in other realms, being in heavens and hells, asuras, hungry ghosts, humans and animals. And again, we just don't have the time to go into detail on that, but it's very interesting to read. And it also has 3 gradual steps, which is basically our practice, discussing the emotional attachments to the objects of desire and seeing that we have to let go of these. And the tools that are most important are the keeping of the precepts and the doing of the meditation. And then there are the 10 stages of the Bodhisattva path. And again, these are too specific to go into all of them. So I'm going to just leave you with the reading of this book and to do that. And also there are 50 demonic states of mind here, which I find kind of scary even to read. But there's one of the things that is most important in meditation is that there are places that you can get to that you don't really want to be in. And I remember one day a young man who lived near the monastery was talking about channeling. And channeling isn't something we do because he was channeling somebody who claimed to be a bodhisattva or a Tibetan Tolku or something. And he could very well be what he was saying, but he could also be a demonic being who was pretending to be something else. And so this is why we don't do things like channeling, because there are a lot of places that you can go in meditation that are simply not a good idea to go there. And if you want to read about them, they're described in great detail at the end of this the Surangama Sutra here. But what's important is to find a teacher that does in fact know what they're doing and emphasizes the precepts and emphasizes the meditation. Because these are the things that are most important for us to learn. So I'm going to leave that in terms of the amount of the Surangama that we're able to cover in a week's time. And what I would like to do is tomorrow morning have more of a discussion so I can see what it is that people are taking away from this and see if there's anything that we can talk about that might have created confusion. So that's my talk for the day. And tomorrow we'll have a discussion instead of a talk. The universe is as the boundless sky, as lotus blossoms above unclean water. Pure and beyond the world is the Buddha nature of the trainee. O Holy Buddha, we take refuge in thee. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha.